Hi, I'm James Cherry and I'm an MHK candidate for the constituency of Onchan.
Lovely, thank you, James. So, 27 years old, am I
Yeah,
right in
yeah.
saying? Standing in Onchan as an independent candidate. Who is James Cherry?
James Cherry is a person who's been born and brought up in Onchan all my life. Always been passionate about Onchan and where I live. And people will know that you ask for an opinion at me and I'll give it you. And I'm happy to stand up and be counted or even be the black sheep of essentially out of the group.
So, people may know you as a former Onchan commissioner, which we will come back to, but this is your first time standing as an MHK. Why is the time right now?
I think the time right now because there's going to be need to be change and we've got to be careful where we go from here now on in from post-pandemic essentially, because that's what we're looking at now is the pandemic, I want to say, is slowly coming to an end. It looks like we've gone past that peak and we're now got to look at the future and recovering. So there's a lot of things that have been left by the wayside during the last 18 months of the pandemic, which in some ways have been rightly so. But we now need to look forward where we're going. And it's going to be a rebuilding process. Very much so when we had the financial crisis, 2008, all around that time, we're going to have to regenerate again. And that's something we need to do. But I think now, instead of just looking at a short-term period, we need to look much further. So, likes of climate change, something that's come up quite recently, and even when I've been knocking on doors, speaking to people recently, is affordable housing. Some of the dramatic costs rising during the pandemic has put a lot of locals off my age actually staying on island, and that's a massive concern.
And we will come back to both of those topics, climate change and affordable housing. I know they rate quite highly in your list of priorities. The general election now is just under 2 months away. How much doorstepping have you been doing so far? If you have been considering standing as an MHK for some time, is it a relatively late time to put your name forward and to announce that you're standing?
Some will say May it is. Some might say it's about right. It just depends on time management. I mentioned this last week when I was down as a guest for the local authorities last week. It just goes about your time management, how you work things out, and how you approach your doorstepping, essentially. I've got a plan together. I'm not going to reveal that because I think I've got an upper hand over other people, but that is how I'm going to do things. I've got friends and family who are assisting me, so if you want to call it the campaign team. And hopefully we've got a good plan together so far.
And is it your strategy that you're going to go and deliver what you stand for to the people on the doorstep rather than using the likes of social media, etc.? Because I know you do have a Facebook page, but there isn't a lot of information about what you stand for on there.
So no, that's literally only been born in the last 48 hours. So I will get stuff up there, but I think you've got to do a blend of the two. There is a lot of, from what I've known with an Onchan, is if you actually want to get someone's vote, they prefer you to be there in person on the door now. I know some people at the moment don't really want someone coming in or anything like that. So doing a blend of both social media and doorstepping, I think it's going to be a good mix. I'm not going to say what the ratio is. It's very, very much business sensitive, but I'm going to do a blend of the two.
We mentioned your age. You're 27. So if you were elected, you'd be one of the youngest. Do you think it's an advantage or a disadvantage?
I think at the moment it should be an advantage. You've my personal opinion, you've got a young person who's willing to stand up and be accounted for. That's what I am, and I'm willing to fight the good fight. But I want to see long-term change, not something that's we'll see it through to just after the next general election, we see it safe. No, we need to look at stuff that's going to be something that's going to last 20, 30 years.
So you see yourself as a career politician rather than just in for 1 or 2 terms?
I don't, but I mean, if the people want me to stand again, I'll stand again. That's why I'm standing this time around. Is after I left the commissioners, a lot of people understood why I left and said I did the right thing. Now, in the last 6 months, 12 months, a lot of people said, you're going to stand for MHK, you're going to stand, oh, go on, you'll be good at this. And I'm like, no. And then coming up to last couple of weeks, it's been every time someone's seen me, it's like, you're going to stand there. Now, I must have had the best part of 300 odd people ask me in the last month or 2 months, say, you're going to stand, and I'm just kind of like, hang on, if I've got these many people asking me now, I think, like, let's go for it.
Now, you mentioned your time as a commissioner there. So it's not your first time in politics. In 2016, you became a commissioner for Onchan, at the time aged 21.
Mm-hmm.
Reflecting on your time with Onchan commissioners, how did you find being a commissioner? Do you think that was a job well suited for you?
Looking back on it retrospectively, I'd probably think it gives me a good grounding, but I think I have ambitions for bigger things. So they weren't always just Onchan related, which you're going to have being at commissioner level. It's only just going to be where you are. Ideas and things I have got to be island wide, and it's harder, much harder to do when you're at local authority. I'm not saying I didn't like it or anything like that. It was a very good grounding. We did get a lot of good work done when we could, even though there's all the sagas going on in the background. I personally pushed on, got stuff done where I could, and it just came to a point where so much stuff was going on that we just got bogged down, and it was time to go.
That's it. And you left in 2019 after serving for 3 years. If successful as a publicly elected MHK, the likelihood is that you could become subject to levels of negativity, toxicity, criticism, possibly even on a bigger scale than some of the issues that you experience at local authority level. Do you think you'd be able to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I actually left the commissioners was stuff that was happening at the boardroom. You could go and tell the chairman, but all they could have done was give him a slap on the wrist, don't do it again. And then 30 seconds later they could do it, because there's no rules or anti-bullying policy type things in place. And that's another part I would look at is there's the bigger picture of local authority reform, but then you need to have a look at that actually, are your local authority got rules in place that are up to date and modern day standards? And I don't think all do. And I think that's something that government should be saying to them, look, come on, you need to do this.
But are you confident that on national level, those protections exist
Yes.
within the House of Keys, within the Tynwald setting?
Yeah, I'm more than confident that they exist. I mean, I've through my time as a commissioner and through other things, I've got to know quite a number of MHKs and MLCs through work. I spoke to them about it, and they said you wouldn't get much of that. You'd still have people criticising you. I mean, we had people criticising me when I was on the commissioners, but you just go back and say, this is what I think. I understand your point of view, but you've got to look at the bigger picture sometimes. A lot of it is sometimes people I've noticed being maybe very narrow-minded and not looking at the bigger picture of what you've got to do. You know, you might be doing a small thing there that they're looking at, but you've got a big, massive jigsaw that you've got to do. But everything ties in. You know, you're not going to complete the picture without that one piece. So.
And as a local authority member for Onchan, you've obviously seen firsthand the issues that the constituency faces. What are people saying to you that they are concerned about in the local area?
I think it's not just in the local area, but there is an issue not just in Onchan but island-wide. As I mentioned previously, it is affordable housing. I think the people of Onchan are more concerned because it's a nice, convenient place to go to work in Douglas, where a lot of people work. You're just out of town, but it's an easy transition to work in Douglas, and there's not much about. There's also dilapidated properties. I was around doing some door knocking the other night, and one of the constituents actually showed me 2 houses that are literally, there's a really well done house in the middle, 2 either side of it, booking ending it, and they look absolutely atrocious. So
how would you solve an issue like that? If a constituent came to you and said, I'm concerned about these dilapidated buildings, if you were elected as Onchan's MHK, how would you solve that problem?
So my personal opinion would be I'd go to the planning officers down, speak to the relevant teams down there and within DEFA and say, look, what can we do? If there's not something in place to sort it, then I say this is not something that's just relevant to Onchan and that street. It's relevant to a lot of properties around the island. You've got building, I mean, there's another example given to me was on, I'm just trying to think of the name, just off Circular Road. Another example was a house that went down on Circular Road because it was dilapidated. Another prime example you could use recently is Alden House in Parliament Street in Ramsey. It's buildings that people are sometimes buying and just letting it go to ruin because it's cheaper than actually knocking it down and rebuilding it. Just let it not go down itself.
But that arguably is an issue that's existed for years and years and years, and we don't seem to have found anybody that can come up with a solution that solves that issue. So what makes you different?
I think it's a very thorny issue, and I think that's what some people have just kicked the can down the road in a case of, don't really want to do with that. It's might not do us any good. And where I am a case of, actually, it's been kicked down the road too far now. Let's get on with it. And it needs to be dealt with, because I think that ties in nicely with the use of brownfield sites. Mainly, you see it in Douglas all the time, using them as car parks. You flatten the building, just use it as a private car park. We need to build on these sites. There was something there before. You can put something back on it. I know we complain that there isn't enough parking in Douglas, but we complain about there's not enough affordable housing. So we've got to have a balance somewhere. And I think no one really wants to build on Greenland if we can help it. And I think we need to bring something in to push building on brownfield sites, and also building more eco-friendly homes as well. Again, that ties in with the climate change.
And climate change is another one of your priorities. I think you cite it as the most important issue to you.
I wouldn't say it's the most important, but I think there's a lot of things that come in at the same level. Affordable housing, climate change, they all have a significant importance, and they all if you put them, they're all very close. Climate change is a big one because, as I say, we could be a world leader in small initiatives, and sometimes it's a lot of small things make a big change.
And some people might argue that at an election time, people use the climate change agenda to suit their needs. It's a popular topic, something that
Absolutely.
a lot of people care about. And if you flag it as one of your top priorities, then some people see that as a little bit of electioneering.
Mm-hmm.
As an independent candidate, one of 24 voices within the House of Keys, what real difference do you think you could make on climate change in the Isle of Man?
I think you need to make a good, solid case. That's the prime thing, and speak to other members and try and work as a team. That's essentially what you've got to do. You've got to work as a team on these things, especially if you're independent. So I know that there may be party candidates you get in, and they may have to toe a party line, but there are some ways where you've got to work as a team to get stuff done. And I think, again, I've said this before, we've got to work at a long-term solution. For example, Pulrose Power Station has got to have an end life at some point. We've had known issues about not having enough rubbish to burn in the energy from waste plant. I think it's a case of we've got to look at good business plans and future planning of what we're going to do. For example, climate change again is with housing. You can reduce the amount of power houses used and stuff like that by maybe doing incentives for developers. I'm not saying that likes of Dandara, but even just a single man on his own who's doing a house up, look at initiatives to help them put greener materials in houses than the ones that are less eco-friendly. It's maybe some things like that they're just small little breadcrumbs, but when you put them all together, you start getting that slice of the loaf, then you get half a loaf, and then hopefully you get a full loaf. It's small little things that can make the big differences, as I've said.
And you have also cited mental health as one of your priorities. Again, what do you feel is the failing from the current government in terms of the approach to mental health?
I think the government's only took it by the horns during the lockdowns. Beforehand, there was a lot of, it's a bit of a touchy subject, how do we deal with it? And now that we've had a lockdown and you've had 80,000 people shut away in their homes for months on end, and you've had anxiety, stress, everything like that come to mind. I'll admit it happened to me. I don't think I've not met someone who hasn't been affected by lockdown and their mental health, because I'm a mental health first aider, so I'm privy to seeing some of what's going on and speaking to people, and people have been affected
So
massively.
what do people need from the government then?
I think the government's, within the last, 12 months or so, has done a lot of work to help things like, say, a way of self-medicating, maybe that way of, there's online support, stuff like that, but not everyone's online. You know, you think to older generations, such as grandparents and stuff like that, not all of them are online. And I know some people who are a couple of years younger or a couple of years older than me, who are also not online. They don't really want to be, which is fair enough to them. But I mean, as a modern generation, we're all soon to be online, but that's their choice. At the end of the day, we're all very similar. We're all a human being. We all have a brain. We all work in very similar ways sometimes, and we can all be affected by one subject in a different way. The human brain is a very complex thing, and trying to find trained health professionals, mental health professionals, is struggle. I mean, it's not just here, but in the UK as well. I think health professionals overall, you're going to struggle because it's so long in training to do these things. And I know I've got friends who are doctors and nurses up at Nobles, and one or two of them aren't local. They've come over, and it's just kind of like, some of them, I think I might go back. And it's trying to retain them. You know, this is the problem. Is the problem of retaining these overseas staff, essentially, the non-local medical staff that come. We've got to look at ways of retaining them. Yes, it's been documented that we pay more than the UK, but
do you think we should continue doing that?
I think you've got to equate it to how much cost of living is and other things as well. I think it's maybe it should be part of an incentive to help, but I don't think it doesn't solve the big picture.
We have touched on a number of issues there that you are obviously passionate about, and as you mentioned at the start, a lot more of what you stand for will become evident over the course of time. Your holding statement, if you like, is that you want to drive long-term beneficial and prosperity change to the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So I think we've got to look at the recent agreement that the government's had with going with the corporate tax of going with the G Summit about we're going to have to do something with the tax. Is you have to look at like the corporate service provider industry. Again, you've got a number of businesses there who employ maybe a small amount of staff. Small amount of staff, a lot of businesses, you're going to have, if those businesses say, well, it's not economically viable to have businesses registered here anymore because of, I think we're going to have to be inventive. Again, we're going to have to regenerate. It's a bit like Doctor Who, you've got to regenerate every time. And I think this is a prime opportunity to do it, and it needs a fresh pair of eyes and ideas outside the box. And I think there are sectors, and sometimes I will admit I don't have a full grasp of what they do. But I wouldn't go in blind with it. I do some research and say, well, have you not thought of trying this? Have you not looked at this example from here? We need fresh pair of eyes to look at things and go, let's try this. Have you thought about that? And just chuck ideas out there to people and go, let's have a look at it. Let's see if we even try it or something like that. I'm not saying to just take a risk and gamble it like on a roulette table. God, no. I think that it's got to be calculated and work with the industries, but also work with the workers as well. So, for example, retaining staff. I think working on problems that maybe within government departments, with you just said about retention, is go to them and go, well, what do you think's wrong? You might be all well and good going to the managerial level, but I think personally I'd rather get me backside on the ground with the workers on the front line and go, what do you see as the problems? And work from there. And essentially, if we can make government more efficient, if we can provide more services, things like that. And I think we've got to go from there. I say regeneration, and this is the time to do it, I think, after a pandemic.
And just finally, James, you are standing as a constituent for Onchan. Why should residents in Onchan vote for you?
I'm a person of change. I want to change things where feasibly possible. I think things do need need to move forward, and I say for longer term prosperity. It is going to take some time to come out of this pandemic, so we're not going to get back, I don't think, for another couple of years, few years, back to levels that we've seen previously. So we've got to look at the bigger picture. If people want me in for the long haul, I'm happy to do the long haul. I'm also happy to speak up against things where no one else is. I'm happy to fight that fight, bring stuff up that other people think is a bit menial maybe, or stuff like that. And I'm happy to look into things for people, go speak to ministers, members, whoever it may be, civil servants, and find answers out for them if they're struggling and have got nowhere in the system.